Actually, I think it's about noon now. What time is it? It's about 1 o'clock now. Anyway, sorry. Good afternoon, YouTube. I've been awake since 6 a.m. I took a nap. I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I lay here and meditated on half dreams until I fell asleep, which is technically napping, but it's not as restful as you might think. But I realized that if I'm awake at 6 a.m., I'm only giving myself 5 hours of rest to do what would amount to 18 hours of work if I'm not stopping before midnight. So between 6 and midnight is, you do the math backward, 6 hours minus 24 is 18. So I lay here and I get myself another. Basically gave myself another 5 hours of rest, which, whatever. It's Sunday. We're allowed a day of rest, right? You don't actually catch up on sleep. The sleep that you don't get, the if you don't get minimum 6 hours, but for most people 8 hours is really what you need. If you don't get it, you don't actually catch up on it. So the damage that you've done to your brain and your body when you're not resting is, sure, repairing, maybe, but when you're talking about your brain, we're talking about um, cumulative deleterious damage. All right, we're talking about irreparable damage. And so anyway, I woke up and I did the thing that I always do. I climbed on TikTok and YouTube Shorts, and yes, the work never ends. I climb on YouTube Shorts and TikTok and I start doom scrolling for things to talk about until I find this young woman, evidently in college, probably, knowing the way things are, probably actually in her master's work, standing in nothing but a medium-sized t-shirt with the hint of her underwear hanging out the bottom, talking about autism, talking about a study about autism, taking autistic and neurodivergent people and doing this thing with them. Now, I'm not going to repeat the study that she talked about because I couldn't find any evidence for it. The first thing I did was listen to her talk about this, and then the first thing I did was Google the keywords that she used to tell me this story with, and I found a lot. I found a lot of interesting and similar findings. I am bathing because I am homeless, for those of you who don't know. And if you find that lewd, I do apologize, but here we go. Continuing on. Um, I Google her and I find interesting, not her personally, I Google her keywords and I find interesting results that I'm going to talk about a little bit, but not the study that she was referring to. And so, the keywords that she used, her study was referring to a, or she was referring to a study that tested neurotypical people and neurodivergent people in regards to making decisions with money. And so she made a claim, and if you can find it and you can hit me up in the comments, I'll be able to see them today, or you can hit me up in the, I'm sorry, not the comments, the chat, this morning's chat. You can let me know in the chat if you could find them, but her her study claimed that neurodivergent people, when given a morally dubious choice that comes out with a monetary profit, or a morally, let's just say, acceptable choice, because she used the terms right and wrong, and we're not doing that because that's not how the study, that's why I was red flagging immediately that this is probably not a real study, because the language that she was using was right and wrong, good and bad, and that's just not how science is done. So she was young and she was mostly naked on YouTube, not YouTube, on TikTok, um, trying to talk to people about autism and neurodivergence in a morally loaded kind of way. And so that means that she was making up what she was talking about. So if you can find that study, that would be awesome. But I'm not going to look for it anymore because I'm convinced she made it up. And so the study results that I did find were interesting. What I found is that many studies, I actually got tired of looking at the different search results. Many studies found that autistic people are more generous in general. They're just more generous in general. And the one that I found the most interesting, especially as regards my own behavior and my therapist encouraging me not to get an autism diagnosis, um, the one that I found most interesting is that autistic type people, neurodivergent people, what we do typically, one of the things that is a type trait among neurodivergent people, these studies were finding, is that they're generous to everyone. So the baseline is that neurotypical people are generous to people that they know well and that they consider family. Closer than friends, family. They're generous with those people. They give to those people. But neurodivergent people give to everyone. They're generous to everyone across the board, um, regardless of perceived closeness. And so what that means is that neurodivergent people are typified by a, um, they're typified by a, let's say, neurotypical openness that a neurotypical person, deal with me here, I'm using extremely fiddly technical jargon language, and so if you don't know what I'm talking about, um, you're just going to have to ask in the comments or in the chat so I can be more articulate in language that you better understand. But basically, a neurotypical, a normal person, a person who is clinically ordinary, and so what that means is socialized. Typically, they socialize and express themselves in a normal, ordinary, usual sort of way. And so autism is effectively being unusual. Okay? That's what neurodivergence means. It means that where the social ordinary, and ordinary means effectively an ordinary, that word comes from the Latin designation of a religious person who had been initiated and worked for the cult. So a person who had been ordinated within the cult was an ordinary within the cult. And so an ordinary person is a person who has taken all of the social um, conditioning from home, school, broader society, and taken all of the appropriate zags. A neurodivergent person literally diverges, and so what that means is they zig where everybody else zagged. You see, this is neurodivergence. And if you start to think about it like if you start to think about it like what it really is, which is a flow chart, right? And so a flow chart is it's a decision-making process gated at yes nos. Neurodivergence is going no at different places than certain people said yes. Effectively, it's a different way of navigating the stimulus of reality. Okay, nothing wrong with you for that, which is interesting because the title, the label, the descriptor, and I'm always talking, and I got to feeling like I need to do this because I'm always talking about, and I've been talking about recently, very recently, inaccurate fingers accidentally minimized my screen. Anyway, I've been talking about how labels are dangerous. Labels are dangerous and harmful, especially if you don't know what the label means. And so the word autism, and it's upsetting to me that autism awareness doesn't begin at this, but the word autism, it's a Greek appellation that was created in the 20th century to describe people who were self-absorbed. Aut and autism means self, and ism comes from the Greek ismos, which effectively means a way of being. It means more than that in the language, but we're just skipping because I can't actually remember the direct translation. So, self way of being, one's own way of being, but it's a way of describing an extreme narcissism. And so, if you if you look at autistic people and you don't know them very well, you don't get to know them very well, especially if you look at autistic people on the internet who identify as autistic, what you'll find is a lot of people who are insisting on zigging where other people zag on purpose. And so it looks from the outside like an extreme self absorption. So even the label autistic is harmful to the neurodivergent person, to the autist, right? But then we can talk about how auteur, same word, self, is highly prized in the artistic fields. An auteur filmmaker, an auteur video game um, developer, these are people that their mega corporation and their fans prize very highly. And so, as a homeless person living in a tent, I found it very interesting that the people who are currently subscribed to my Patreon and currently hinge on every word I say, I don't mean that, but who are absorbing a great deal of my material and who are then turning around and taking the messaging of my material and making more material with it, like I am encouraging everyone subscribed to my Patreon to do, are typically neurodivergent. And so I think if I'm going to give my therapist as much credit as possible for telling me to avoid seeking a neurodivergence, um, an autistic diagnosis. Now, there's two reasons. If I give her the maximum amount of credit, I was talking to a young woman named Annalise for a few hours yesterday. I say a few, but maybe an hour and a half. And she kept insisting that I remember an optimistic mindset because through hardship that we all experience, what gets us all through it is optimism. And I was saying, well, I'm not an optimistic person on principle. I'm a nihilistic person who chooses a positivistic outlook within the nothing. And she goes, yeah, but what you want to do is you want to aim yourself at, and you want to hope for the best outcome. And I go, okay, well, the optimal outcome is a way that I can understand optimism, and that's a worldview that everything will be optimum. Hey, Russ, how you doing, buddy? Um, that your outcomes will be optimal. And so, if I'm trying to take an optimal outlook as regards the fact that my therapist didn't want me to seek out an autistic diagnosis, I think the first reason is because she is correct that the medical establishment in Ohio wants to diagnose as many people with autism as possible because the medical establishment gets kickbacks for treating the defective. And the other reason, beyond their being incentivized to just say that I was neurodivergent, is difficult to say out loud because it makes me angry. But I think I think she thought that it would justify certain behaviors that as a therapist, um, she's trained to encourage re-education, relearning, growth, development. And so as a therapist, she's probably watched a lot of people who weren't actually neurodivergent fake a neurodivergence diagnosis so they didn't have to get better at the things they were bad at. But I think the real reason is because of my learning patterns. The medical establishment, every industry in the States is problematic right now. It's all too big to fail, so none of it can self-correct. from within. I think the real reason, though, is that because of my learning style, because of my abuse, and because of my post-traumatic stress disorder, my complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but specifically because of my social learning style, that I developed neurodivergent trait problem-solving skills. I learned to look at my decisions as a flowchart, and I tended to take the neurodivergent path because the neurodivergent path, if this young woman isn't full of shit, is the morally appropriate choice. And now I think this woman is full of shit. But her full of shit aligns with something that I've noticed as I study the last 10,000, 15,000 years of human history. Yes, I do, Sage. I live in a tent so I can do this exact thing that I'm doing. Please stop interrupting me. Studying the last 15,000 years of human history, since the Ice Age, since the ending of the Ice Age, what I have noticed, and I'm not alone on this, other people have pointed out that civilization begins at human beings taking care of one another, and that date keeps being stretched further and further backward. It's actually stretched into probably not, Sage. Give me a moment. They keep pushing back the antiquity of medicine, of caring for one another, of communities, families, tribes, living in larger and larger numbers to be able to take care of the sick, the elderly, and the young. And what that means is that the social environment that allows for autism, let's say maybe 3 families, father, multiple mothers, children, father, multiple mothers, children, father, multiple mothers, children, 3 families living in close proximity allows for autism because those 3 families are going to have their ways that the father raises the children. So 3 individual isms as far as the way the father raises the children. So 3 neurotypical approaches to problem solving. And then let's say each father has 3 wives, and so each wife is going to provide a unique neurotypical or a unique neurological set to the children, because the mother, when a child is born, provides as many as 85% of her neurons, her brain's current construction, to the child as it is developing. As much as 85% of her current neurons, the child mimics. The child's brain forms the neurons in the exact same configuration. So as much as 85% of the way that child thinks is the mother during pregnancy, the way she was thinking and had thought up to that point. That's why the cravings and stuff are such an important, thank you, Russ. They're such an important part of pregnancy. The environment of the pregnancy is extremely important. So you have 3 different fathers, 3 different wives, 9 different neurology sets, 3 different ismoses. And so each family is going to be its own little complexity engine on its own. Those families live together. Those children have to be able to get along. The fathers have to be able to get along. The mothers have to be able to get along. The children have to be able to get along. So there's going to be a group ismos as well. There's going to be a group way of thinking. So there's going to be ways that they shape all of the children. The adults came to adulthood in our setups. They came to adulthood hypothetically in other setups like this. So they come together. These children now, they have an ismos that is their base set. That's where autism comes from. You have to have that kind of complexity in order for someone to look at the complexity from within it and say, I'm going to make different choices. That's what autism is. That's what auteurship is. Someone who can look at the greater field of art and say, I'm going to do different things. And so yesterday, Russ maybe can tell you, I was talking about the 1970s, and so I'm back to listening to 1970s tunes that were on the radio that everybody heard. Everybody knew these songs. It's really funny because in that same way that I was doom scrolling to get to where I just was, a few days ago I was doom scrolling. Um, I forgot that I slept in my socks the night before last, and so my socks are not in my shoes today. I had to get those off of my feet as soon as I got home. But if you were watching last night and you heard me say that, and you're curious, the sore between my toe that I thought was poison ivy, and still was pretty sure is poison ivy, is no longer inflamed and hurting actually really badly. So that's, hey, crushing it. Um, so distracting myself with that. I don't remember exactly where I was. I was building toward a close. Anyway, so I'm going to pivot back to the point. The point is that yesterday I gave you a little bit of a roadmap of how I gave you a little bit of a roadmap of how if you were asking me, okay, I would like to be generous with my resources with you. I have enough resources to be generous with someone outside of my immediate family and social circle. And because I have identified that you are an intellectual who lives in a tent, and because you're someone that I believe would use those calories to benefit me and benefit the community, and I am of the opinion, because I've seen you do it, that once I have donated enough to your cause, you'll say my name frequently, and so people will know that I am superior to them morally, and that my financial uh, loss is actually a gain, because I understand, whether I understand it because I know what it's called and I know what they did, or I understand it intuitively because there's just something that I feel like is missing in our civilization, in our culture, in our society. I understand patronage. That's why Patreon is called Patreon. Patronage is where people with means go to places that do not have means and provide them some of the means so that those things can remain a thing. So Roman patronage was where a rich person would donate, say, a huge name, a huge amount of money, and give it to an artist. Or they would take an artist into their life and into their home and treat them like a family member without adopting them. So what that means is they would pay for their per diem, right? They would make sure that every day they had a per diem to eat on, and they had a bed to sleep in, and they had a woman to sleep with, um, whether they were male or female. Um, And so if you're looking around the internet for somebody who understands what you can do with the little bit of wealth that you've generated, so that you can give some of it to somewhere, so that you can feel like you're giving back to your society in a way that you feel like matters, because maybe you don't have my intellectual skills, or maybe you don't have public speaking skills, or maybe you don't feel like you want to learn internet editing, video, audio, whatever, but you do want to make sure that something that you feel like is very important continues. If you want to patronize without patronizing an artist, an intellectual, because see, the intellectual used to be considered among the artistic class. That's why singers, poets, and authors, writers, used to spend so much time, like, if you know science fiction, if you know the history of the science fiction genre, you know that the authors within that genre used to hang out with physicists when they weren't actually astrophysicists themselves. They used to hang out with the world's elite intellectuals and hang out, like literally just hang out together talking. And the reason for that is because the best art is made with the highest and highest quality knowledge that the civilization has at that time. So for example, when I read Dante Alighieri, I didn't tell you this, but Dante Alighieri was the world's foremost, well, the Western world's foremost polyglot and linguist at the time. He's the person that figured out that languages evolve. He's the one that figured out that Indo-European could be a language family. He was the one that figured out that language families could work, and he did it. He did it by following in the footsteps of Plato and Aristotle, by reading what they were saying closely, taking what they were saying seriously, and then experimenting, asking the wider world, well, is what they're saying true? Okay, and so I'm Shaggy Philolitea. What that means is I'm a shaggy dog storyteller. What that means is that I tell stories that don't have an obvious beginning, middle, and end, but do take you to places you never thought you would go before. And if you find that valuable in its own right, the way that that tradition used to pay for itself was the storyteller used to park himself in taverns and tell stories. So I'm parking myself live on the internet and I'm telling stories, and the way the bar would keep him going was with beers, with the money for a beer. If you don't believe me about this, Mark Twain himself wrote about and participated in the tradition. So I am following in a time-honored American literary and storytelling tradition that I am allowed to participate in because I'm an American, motherfuckers. And I know more stories than you do. Got my breakfast stored away. I spent $25 of the $40 that I had yesterday on a pizza and a salad, and I'm not embarrassed about that or sad, because I don't know if you noticed, but it's 1 o'clock today, and I just put my breakfast in my pocket. So cheese and bread do something other than constipate you and make you gain weight. They also sit in your stomach and take a really long time to digest, so they act as appetite suppressants in general, unless you're just a fat ass who sits around and gorges all day because you need to feel full. I'm not gonna be nice to you for that. Yeah, well, you said slaves, but you mean Slavs. Yeah, I was talking about this to you a little bit yesterday. So one of my personal interests, if you watch my relaxation videos with Final Fantasy 1, you'll hear this ad nauseum, to the point that even I got tired of it. But one of my personal interests, if I'm autistic in any kind of way, right? One of the things that autistic people are, and I'm still going to tell you how to be more like me if you want to know how I would do the thing, how I would do what I'm asking you to do. Autistic people are typified by having a particular interest, one extreme interest that they just really know a lot about, right? And so we call that nerd behavior and nerd culture, because autistic people aren't self-absorbed. Autistic people are just different, but we tend to surround ourselves with people who are just like us, because we tend to have an extreme interest. We tend to have an extreme focus on one interest, and so I have many interests, and I focus intensely on them for short bursts. And one of those interests is the Indo-European language family. And yes, the Slavs are Indo-European. The Slavs, the Germans, the Scandinavians, those places were all settled at effectively the same time in history by effectively the same people. So when I was talking to you about the family setup, when I use the 3 adult males, 9 adult females setup, that's how the Indo-Europeans actually did things. The children were expected to leave the family, leave the family structure at adulthood and go settle a new village at some point. That's what Viking is. You're struggling with that one, buddy. Yeah, I know what you mean. The Slavs. Yeah. The Indo-European language family first developed in the Caucasus region of the Caspian-Pontic steppe. So when the world talks about steppe horse soldiers, most of them were Indo-European. So like the people that first invented and developed the wheel, the carriage, the chariot, these were all Indo-European peoples coming out of the Caspian-Pontic steppe. And so the reason the Slavic people, we talked about this a little bit yesterday, but the reason the Slavic people are denigrated is about the Viking slave trade. That's where the word slave comes to us from. It's going to be a hot one today, so I really need to bring my water bottle. Na 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 na. I've been talking a lot about how George Harrison didn't like the Beatles music, but I don't know how you couldn't like Hey Jude, George. Come on, buddy. Don't be a dickhead. George and I would have got along. And that's one of the reasons I'm kind of talking about autism, is I really get along with autistic people. I get along with autistic people really well until they know they're autistic, and then they stop being self-conscious about the ways they're different. And they start to lean performatively. It's all good, bro. It's all good, Russ. They start to lean performatively into the way they're different, and they become intolerable because they're trying to be intolerable because they've just realized for the first times in their life they actually are doing things that are actually attention-seeking behaviors, and they weren't doing it for attention before they were diagnosed and encouraged to not be self-conscious about it. So it just, diagnosis in the medical industry are a problem in general, and so I'm just going to give my therapist the benefit of the doubt that that's why she didn't want me to seek an autism diagnosis. And so what I'm saying is that because I learn by observing, and then I pick my behaviors, I would encourage you to do the same. It takes years to master that skill, which means that if you're learning it, women, fathers, men, while your children are in utero, if you're developing that skill while your children are in utero, they will be born with brains that have those skills developing, that have the reminders and the thought process to be mindful of their behaviors. Those are thorns. And then if you're learning it as their children and you're developing the skill as children, they will have an example in the home. And so that ismos will just be your home's ismos, so that when these children go out into the wider world to engage in the wider world, they will have an ismos to engage in the wider world. They will have a worldview that allows them to engage in the wider world in such a way that they can get along with strangers, which is really what you need. Everybody's talking about how that's what we need. That's really what you need. Hey, if you're shorter than 6 feet, this section of grass that I'm walking through is actually taller than you are. Whew. Yeah. What the world needs, we've been talking about this since the 1970s, right? What the world needs is more love, right? What the world needs is peace and harmony and all of these things. And the only way you arrive at that is by adults who already have it. Okay? You only get there by having adults who have it. The way you have adults who have skill sets that allow them to get along with one another is by teaching children how to get along with one another. And what we don't do in elementary and K-12, talent, yeah, look at Wolfgang, Van Halen. Look at Wolfgang Von Halen. Of course I'm being watched. I'm being watched by you, Tom. If you look at Wolfgang Von Halen, sure, he's a fat ass, sure, he's a mama's boy, sure, he's an underachiever, but he plays his dad's music effortlessly and has since he was a little boy. The environment that you're raised in is the environment that will teach you the skills that make things easy for you. So if you're a parent, like my parents came into... I came into a world where my parents thought that reading was too difficult to master, mathematics was something that you could fake, and spelling didn't matter. Tom, you're not funny, and you're not cute. Someone attacked my tent 2 days ago, the last time people pulled this shit, and it's just not cute. Children. That is an example of exactly what I'm talking about. If you want children to not be like that, if you want people to not be like that as adults, you have to already not be like that as adults. We are not in the stage of history where we just get to sit back on our laurels and say, oh, well, some people's kids. No, your kids.